Hi guys, welcome. It's Guy, Man City, back at it again. 20th week into the NBA season now. This is crazy. March is in full swing. Name's Rennie Riquet, Man City, host of Sports and Shorts and Sorts, podcast that breaks you down your week of sports, where we didn't have enough for an NBA content, so we did our own little recap. Break down the week of NBA and talk about some stuff that might go on in the future. Some stuff I got right and some stuff I got wrong. It's a crapshoot, but let's do it. Start like we always do, starting in the Eastern Conference, starting with the Atlantic Division and the team with the best record still in the NBA. I'm talking about the Boston Celtics. They've already clinched a playoff spot. The first team already. They went 4-0 this past week, beating the Suns, the Trailblazers, and Jazz all by double digits and to end their road trip. They then return home and beat the Suns again, this time, like I said, at home. Celtics have consistently been the best team in the NBA all season. That Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown 1-2 punch is pretty phenomenal. You've heard on this podcast me talk about how I believe they have the best starting five in the entire league. Still stand by that. But this past week, they didn't even have the regular starting five. Kristaps Porzingis missed some time, and Al Horford showed up and showed there's plenty left in the tank, dropping a season-high 24 points in that win over the Suns. This team's looking to carry even more pressure into the postseason, Joe Mazzulla's always locked in. He showed that as there was a time called in the Suns game. Royce O'Neal tried to get a shot up, and you can see Joe Mazzulla closing him out on the contest, saying, you know what? I'm going to ask guys to contest. I got to contest too. He's an odd duck, but he's got this team playing the best basketball in the league, and they've got a lot of expectations on him. But we'll see if they'll raise that Larry O'Brien trophy at the end of the year. But it's the Celtics. They're looking like the best team right now, and they have all season pretty much. But we'll go from Boston. We'll go to New York. The Knicks went 3-1 this past week and hold the fourth best record in the East. They beat a tough Magic team before falling to Philly in a very low scoring game by today's standards. The Knicks, then you got OG Anunoby back in the lineup. We know he missed time after surgery, removing some fragments in his elbow. Not a good time, I imagine. But yeah, and they beat the Sixers in their little rematch there. And in that win over the Sixers, the Knicks went 3 straight games with holding their opponents under 80 points, which, that was crazy back then, but today that's crazy, And this is the first time the Knicks have done this feat since November of 2000, where Coach Tibbs was actually the assistant coach under head coach Jeff Van Gundy. The Knicks then started a West road trip by going to Portland and beating the Trailblazers. They beat them pretty good. Brunson had 45 in the win. This team's starting to get healthy again. And as I said, OG's back in the lineup. Isaiah Hartenstein's on a minutes restriction as he works his way back into the lineup. Still no Julius Randle or Mitchell Robinson, as there's no timetable on when they're coming back. No official one anyway, but they're hoping to get him back for the postseason. But getting OG back is huge, and the defensive numbers show it. Knicks have some tough matchups on this Western road trip. Games against the Sacramento Kings, the Warriors, and the Nuggets. We'll see what this Knicks team's made of here. Next up in the division, the 76ers. They went 1-3 this past week, trying to stay afloat. They're missing Joel Embiid big time, and Philadelphia lost to the Pelicans, but bounced back and beat the Knicks in that low-scoring game I was just talking about there. They only had 79 points and got the win. They then got crushed by the Knicks the following game, but the Sixers would then lose to Milwaukee and the Bucks there. The Sixers have just won 3 of their last 10, and Tyrese Maxey's been doing what he can, but that hole by Joel Embiid is just too much to fill. The past week, Nick Nurse, the head coach, has been trying to switch things up, putting Mo Bamba into the starting lineup for Paul Reed. That didn't really seem to make a difference, and Reed would end up playing more minutes in each of those games anyway. This front court's just having trouble keeping up with bigger teams, and Tobias Harris and Kelly Oubre Jr. are not considered reliable right now. Their inconsistencies are hurting the game. Some games they look great, others not so much. So it's a tough go right now in Philadelphia as they have the 7th best record in the East, which is a play-in spot, and there's still no word on whether Joel Embiid's even coming back this season. Massive loss. We'll go back to New York. The Brooklyn Nets went 1-2 this past week. Nets lost by double digits in Charlotte, but then would bounce back and stump the tough Cleveland Cavaliers in Cleveland. Then the Nets would lose a close one in Orlando to the Magic. The game against the Magic was back on Wednesday, so the Nets have a little bit of a break, and they might need this break because they have some tough games coming up against the Pacers, Suns, Pelicans, and Bucks. And this team's it's a tough read, you know. The last few games, Cam Thomas has looked like Cam Thomas we saw early in the season before he went down with injury, and that road win over the Cavs, the Nets showed some potential that thinks, hey, maybe this roster can win. But then you followed up with a loss where only Thomas is showing up and everyone's struggling. It sounds like they still want to build around Mikal Bridges, but maybe that's not his role. You know, it's going to be a tough offseason for this team to decide which direction they want to go in. But for the rest of the season, I see it playing out with just mediocrity. A few highs here, but mostly lows. We'll wrap up the Atlantic Division going to the Toronto Raptors. They went 0-3 this past week as they're on a 5-game losing skid. The Raptors looked like they were going to pull off a comeback in Portland, but lost in overtime. And the bucket that forced overtime by Chris Boucher came at a bit of a price. The big Canadian suffered a partial tear in his MCL, which will keep him out a little bit. The Raptors would then lose in Denver the Nuggets before losing in Detroit to the Pistons. R.J. Barrett was not present in that game for the Pistons, and it was later announced his little brother, Nathan Tyler Barrett, passed away. The comment was posted publicly by R.J.'s father, Rowan Barrett, who is also Canada Basketball's general manager. No cause of death has been provided yet, but sad to hear someone going so young, you know. A passing that puts life into perspective for sure. So that's why I wore the RJ Barrett jersey today. I know it's a Knicks one, but yeah, it's a bummer. Hopefully he can get through this difficult time. You know, the Raptors back-to-back games against the Magic, and I'm sure they'll do some sort of tribute for RJ's little brother. Still a sad moment. This roster is full of injuries, and it's time for Masai Ujiri to see who he wants on next season's roster. The game against the Pistons, rookie Grady Dick was the longest tenured Raptor in the game. You know, that 2019 championship team seems eons ago. Injured Chris Boucher being the lone member left from that squad. We'll leave the Atlantic Division, go to the Central, the division leading Milwaukee Bucks, team with the second best record in the East. They went 2-2 this past week, losing a tight one to the Lakers in LA with Damian Lillard getting his game-winning shot attempt blocked by Spencer Dinwiddie. The Bucks would then bounce back from that loss and beat the Clippers in LA, but then the Bucks would get pounded by the Kings by 35. The Bucks would then head home and beat an Embiid-less Sixers team. Dame has had his moments and was monumental in those two big wins that the Bucks picked up this past week, but this is still definitely the Greek Freaks team. Looking like a former MVP all this week, dominating in the paint, keeping the Bucks in every game, minus that one against the Kings there. But yeah, Giannis 30 plus in every one of those games. And when he's out there, this team's always got a chance. Doc Rivers, his fingerprints are starting to come all over this team here. You know, they're starting to find their way a little bit, but still, they need some crucial stops in crunch time a little more consistently to be considered a title team, as I called them at the beginning of the season. Really big game coming up. I'm looking forward to it between Boston and Milwaukee Wednesday, March 20th. That should be a doozy. The Bucks, they got one thing in mind this year, and that's a title. They want the division as well. Hey, they'll come with it, but they want a title, and they'll need to keep winning if they want to win this division. Because this next team, Cleveland, the Cavaliers, they're right at the heels of the Bucks, third best record in the East, and just like I said, right behind them. They went 2-2 this past week, winning a close one against the Minnesota Timberwolves. They then lose two straight at home, a surprising one to the Nets I alluded to, and then a close one to the Suns. Donovan Mitchell returned to the lineup on a little bit of a minutes restriction and a big Cavs win over the Pelicans, which was very impressive. But no team has really shown the better next man up mentality than the Cleveland Cavaliers. Like I said, Mitchell's missed some time. Evan Mobley's out again for a while. Jared Allen, man, this guy steps up. Best throw in the league. He steps up and he looks amazing in the paint. 33 point, 18 rebound game against Gobert and the Timberwolves. That's a potential defensive player of the year nominee, and that's what Allen did against him. George Niang, he wasn't getting tons of minutes. Suddenly he's thrown to the Wolves and throwing double digits up. Donovan Mitchell, he returned, and he gave the Pelicans problems there. If he can stay on the floor with this deep team, and if Mobley can stay on the floor, I think this team's a threat. I know they're still young. Garland's a youngster. You know, Allen doesn't have tons of playoff experience, but Mitchell's seen the playoffs a little bit, you know. I think they could do some damage. Remember, they did beat the Celtics earlier this month, so this kind of a response to adversity really maybe should help JB Bickerstaff get some Coach of the Year consideration. He definitely deserves it. Next up in the division, the Indiana Pacers, sixth best record in the East, going 2-1 this past week. Going on the road and beating a tough Magic team. They then go into OKC and beat the Thunder by 10. And they looked for a big win at home, but fell to the Bulls in a crazy game that went to overtime. In that game, it had an insane chase down block by Pascal Siakam where he blocked Kobe White, but really landed on him bad. It looked bad. The Pacers would lose late, and yeah, it was a great game, but a bad loss for the Pacers there. And this team has lost some depth, with Canadian Benedict Mathurin having season-ending surgery to repair a torn labrum. Huge bummer. Mathurin was starting to find his groove at post-All-Star game. I picked him to win MIP this year. I have mentioned I think I might have been a year early on that one. I think next season he'll have a good chance. We'll see what's up with that. Pacers are still continuing on because, like I said, they do have that depth. It seems like Rick Carlisle's kind of got his starting five going forward with the recent injuries and the acquisitions of a few weeks ago. Siakam, Neesmith, Miles Turner, Halliburton, and Canadian Andrew Nembhard seems to be the five he's rocking with. And like I said, they got those guys coming in off the bench. I don't know what they really will do in the playoffs, but when you score like they do, you're always in a game. You know, if they could get timely stops here and there, turn some of those L's into W's. But if it's a tight battle between these play-on spots, you don't want to be playing the Pacers. So we'll go from Indiana to Chicago. The Bulls went 1-3 this week as they struggled a little bit, losing some tough games, losing on the road to the Clippers and then the Mavericks, and then they were involved in that OT thriller I just mentioned. DeMar DeRozan really looked great in that one, hitting a fadeaway jumper to force OT, and in OT he was lighting it up. He finished with 46 points and 9 boards on the night. And in that huge scoring night, he moved a few spots up in the all-time scoring list, passing Elgin Baylor, Dwayne Wade, and Adrian Dantley to move in the 32nd place all-time. So congrats to DeMar there. I mentioned Siakam, his former teammate, having that huge block on Chicago's Kobe White. Like I said, that replay looked bad. But an MRI revealed just a mild hip strain, so Kobe White could return to the lineup as soon as this weekend. Hopefully, the most improved player favorite can return sooner than later. But the Bulls will then play the Clippers again, this time at home. Hopefully, they did play the Clippers again at home, and it would have the same result as the Clippers won again. So now the Bulls reside in the 9th spot in the East. In a play-in spot, kind of similar to the Nets, it's hard to predict what the Bulls are going to give you on any given night. But the Bulls have some winnable games coming up this week. Maybe they can go on a little bit of run, try to get some confidence, see if they can move up the Eastern Conference standings. We'll wrap up the Central Division. We'll go into Detroit. Pistons went 2-1 this week, which you do not hear a lot about Detroit this year. They gave up a boatload of points to Luka and the Mavs in a home loss to Dallas, but they bounced back by winning by 17 at home to the Hornets. They then hold on to beat the Raptors, as I mentioned just before. And I mentioned it last episode, but I'm liking the look of this Pistons team. You know, they had to make some changes mid-season. They're like, yo, this roster is fucking sucking right now. And I applaud them. They just switched it up. They made changes, and it's kind of working. James Wiseman's numbers aren't going to jump out at you, but he's having some big highlights lately, throwing down some sick dunks. The man-child, Jalen Duren, looking unreal. Another 2020 game for the 20-year-old, 24 points and 23 boards with 5 dimes in that win over the Raptors. He killed the front court of the Raptors. Pistons got some tough games coming up with back-to-back games against the Heat, and as the Heat are trying to move up the standings, and then games against the Celtics and Pacers. So this team's hungry, and they got a taste of winning, so maybe they could play spoilers on some of these playoff-chasing teams. We'll leave the Central and head to the Southeast Division to wrap up the Eastern Conference, starting with the division-leading Orlando Magic, team with the 5th best record in the East. They went 1-2 this past week, losing in New York to the Knicks before falling at home to the Pacers. But the Magic would bounce back with a win over the Nets. The Magic will be looking to extend their winning streak to 4 as they have back-to-back games with the Raptors before hosting the Hornets. They then have a showdown with the Pelicans before the next episode, but this team plays hard defense, and I'd say they follow their leader, Paulo Banchero. I believe he's the main guy now. Earlier in the season, I said, there was maybe a two-headed beast with him and Franz Wagner, but Bankero, he's the captain now. This team is still mad deep, and they can come at you in many different ways. I mentioned how good the team is defensively, and if you think, hey, we got a break when someone goes to the bench, just kidding. You have Jonathan Isaac coming off the bench, who's quietly become one of the best defenders in the NBA. Now that he's healthy and playing, this team is insanely young and learning on the fly, but they're one of the more fun teams, I think, to watch in the NBA, and I'm so glad the front office finally rewarded a guy giving head coach Jamal Mosley a 4-year contract extension. He's been a huge part of the turnaround for the Magic, and I'm glad they're keeping him around to see it out here. Stick in Florida, go to the Miami Heat. Heat struggled this past week, going 0-3 as they're on a 4-game losing streak now. First losing to the Thunder in OKC, then losing at home to the Wizards, which not a lot of teams have done. That one was a big surprise. The Heat would then lose to the Nuggets in an NBA Finals rematch. This Heat team looked like they kind of had things figured out before this past week here. They're getting balanced scoring, but they've just lacked execution in the fourth quarter, which is very unlike Eric Spoelstra's coach team. Health isn't really as the problem, as guys seem to be coming back from injury, but it seems to be getting everyone to fit into their roles, something that the team's trying to learn on the fly, and something they're hoping to figure out sooner than later, or they'll find themselves in a play-in spot. But I mean, of all teams not to be worried about a play-in spot, it's the Heat. They were in one last year, and they went all the way to the finals, so we'll see what the Heat have going forward. We'll leave Florida. We'll go to Georgia. The Atlanta Hawks went 1-2 this past week as they hold on to the very last play-in spot in that 10th position out east. Still playing without Trae Young, who's recovering from that surgery he had. DeJounte Murray has showed a lot of promise as the lead guard. But a lot of times it's similar to what Trae Young has done. He'd have big nights, but the Hawks wouldn't always get the win. Just for example, Murray had 40 points in a big game against Portland, but it wasn't enough to get a win over the Trailblazers. And I think this team should survive the rest of the season and make the play-in. I don't know if they'll advance past that, but the depth of this team took a bit of a hit with Saddiq Bey tearing his ACL. I mentioned him in episode 41 of my other podcast and Jersey shoutouts, but that's a big hit for them. And also possible most improved player candidate Jalen Johnson. He's been dealing with an ankle issue. So a little bit of depth issues with the Hawks here. They got some winnable games. They play today in Utah. And they have some tough ones going back to back against the Clippers and Lakers before going to Phoenix. So the Hawks have a similar situation as a lot of other struggling teams in the NBA. The lack of inconsistency, except on the defensive end, where they just play bad defense. So it'll be hard for them to succeed in the NBA. But they have the players that could go off any night, like the before-mentioned Murray. Bogdanovich is still a stud there. So we'll see what the Hawks can do to try to increase any postseason optimism here. Next in the division, the Hornets. Charlotte Hornets went 2-2 this past week, which is pretty impressive for them. So their loss to the Wizards put the Hornets' losing streak up to 6 games before they can get a dub. And the Hornets snapped the streak the very next night, beating the Nets, as I mentioned earlier. Big nights for Miles Bridges and the number 2 overall pick, Brandon Miller, in that one. The Hornets would then lose to the Pistons before bouncing back and beating the Grizzlies. And I've mentioned him before, Miles Bridges. He's consistently looked like the impromptu leader of this team with all the injuries they've been dealing with, the biggest being LaMelo Ball, of course. Still no timetable on his return from his injury. I was hoping Trey Mann would be the big guy here coming from OKC. I was hyping him up in that trade with Gordon Hayward, but maybe we should look at who came with Mann in that transaction. His backcourt partner, Vasily Micic, the 30-year-old Serbian guard, is looking like the biggest steal in that trade now. Looking great in that Grizzlies win. 25 points, 8 dimes. Lots of Hornets playing with their futures on the line in Buzz City. We'll wrap up the East by going to the very basement. The Wizards went 2-2 this past week, which again is impressive when you look at their record. They were coming into those games on a 16-game losing streak. That streak ended against the Hornets, like I just mentioned, and then the Wizards would follow that up by going to Miami and getting that big win over the Heat for, like I said, a very rare 2-game winning streak. Tyus Jones was fantastic in that win with 16 dimes and Kuzma scoring 32. The Wizards looked good, but then things would return to normalcy in D.C. as the Wizards would lose their next 2 games against the Grizzlies and the Rockets, starting another losing streak. So with all the negativity in Washington this season, it was nice for the fans to get a short little winning streak, but this team has a tough schedule coming up with games against the Bulls, Celtics, and the Kings here. So this losing streak could get a little further for them. But we'll go to the Western Conference, starting in the Northwest with the division and conference leaders. It's currently a tie atop of the West. It's been close all season, but as of this recording, the Oklahoma City Thunder are just a hair ahead. The Thunder went 3-1 this past week, winning at home against the Heat and Grizzlies, but they lose a close one to the visiting Pacers. Thunder would bounce back by winning another close one at home, this time over the Mavericks. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander has consistently been playing at an MVP level, but the real difference most of the season has been Jalen J-Dub Williams, the second scorer. His 27 points and 5 assists in the big win over the Mavericks was massive. Big blocks in that game, too, including a highlight block on Kyrie Irving. He skied up for that one. This team continues to do great things despite being one of the youngest in the league. But the real test will be playoff time. And as a lot of teams, it's going to be the real show up or lose, I guess, as the playoffs go. I didn't really know where I was going with that one, but Cason Wallace, another fine draft pick for the Thunder, as that rookie's fit into the lineup seamlessly, which has brought some questions about Josh Giddey's future in OKC. His minutes have come down. I mean, you got to give the Aussie credit. His numbers haven't really dropped too bad. They have dropped a bit considering the minute droppage, but he's still doing what he can with the time he's playing. The minutes just aren't there anymore. There's other guys coming in that take his job. So we'll see what happens if they keep Giddey around. Maybe he'll have a hot run and they'll bump up his trade value, or maybe they'll keep him. I mean, he is just 21 years old, but getting a little ahead of myself here. Still got to work on this season. We'll go up to the next team in the conference, next team in the division, the Denver Nuggets, the team neck and neck with the Thunder at the top of that mountain. They went 3-0 this past week as their winning streak's up to 4. Nuggets crushed the Jazz at home, then squeaked past the Raptors. Then they went into Miami for a rematch of last year's NBA Finals and easily took care of the Heat. Jokic is playing at another MVP level here and looking at a third trophy to his resume. Jamal Murray has been healthy and looking great, and this team knows their roles. Jokic knows what he's doing. The complementary pieces are there. We know Murray can crank it up postseason time like he does every time, especially on the title run. But they're a serious threat to repeat here as defending champions, and they could have the West won by the end of the season. Excuse me there. Nuggets face my Spurs before having some tough matchups against the Mavericks, Timberwolves, and Knicks, so we'll see how long this 4-game winning streak can go. Literally just behind those teams in the division and the conference are the Minnesota Timberwolves. They went 1-2 this past week, losing a tough one in OT to the Cavaliers, we mentioned. Then in that game, Rudy Gobert was given a late technical foul that disqualified him from the game on fouls. He made the little finger rubbing gesture, like the Simpson, the taxes. He did the money thing. The refs saw it, teed him up, and that cost him $100,000 by the way of a fine. Not a fine for Gobert, but the Wolves then went into La La Land, lost to the Lakers, but they bounced back and beat the Clippers. Anthony Edwards, he's picked his scoring up a bit with the absence of Karl Anthony Towns, and this team seems deep enough to carry on without their all-star. The main thing is that this team really depends on what keeps them in the game, their defense. It really keeps them in, so they have a couple games with the Jazz before facing off with the Nuggets next Tuesday, and that should be a great game. But next up in the division is a bit of a drop-off from the top 3 teams in the division. I'm talking about the Utah Jazz, team with the 12th best record in the conference, 6 games behind the last play-in spot. Jazz went 0-2 this past week, losing to 2 title favorite teams. First, they lost to the Denver Nuggets by 21. Then they lost to the Celtics by 16. But a lot of teams would lose those games, so I'm not worried about that. But the injuries are adding up. Lauri Markkanen's still missing time with an injury. Rookie Taylor Hendricks has been out as well. Rookie Keontae George has stepped up with the extended minutes, showing that he belongs in this league. Starting point guard Colin Sexton continuing to lead by example, but with all these injuries, it's at least giving the Jazz a good look at players that they may want to keep around next season. We'll wrap up the Northwest by going to Portland. They had a very busy week, the Trailblazers. They went 2-3. Lost big to the Rockets, but bounced back to beat the Raptors in OT. They'd then lose to the Celtics, but bounced back to beat the Atlanta Hawks, but then falling to the New York Knicks. But at least, they broke the Knicks' streak of holding people under 80 points in that loss. But as heard, this team went up and down last week. This young Blazers are struggling for consistency. Anthony Simons has found his scoring touch again, and DeAndre Ayton is playing some really inspired ball at the center position. Double-doubles in his last 3 games, with 2 of the 3 going for 30-plus points. Scoot Henderson's back in the lineup, getting some time as well. This team's really just figuring out, what their core is going forward. It's looking like a good group, some motivated guys out there. Canadian Delano Banton's putting up good numbers in the time he's getting, so good up to him. We'll leave the Northwest. We'll go to the Pacific Division, starting with the division leading Los Angeles Clippers. Clippers have the fourth best record in the West, and they went 2-2 this past week. Beat the Bulls at home before falling to the Bucks and Wolves at home, but then they'd bounce back and beat the Bulls on the road in Chicago in their little rematch. Clippers looked really good in the Bulls this past week, but struggled against those other two tough competition matches, the Bucks and the Wolves. But to be fair, the Clippers played against the Bucks with no PG or Kawhi. Still stayed in that game. But then the next game against the Wolves, Kawhi only played 12 minutes, and he's been dealing with some back spasms. But he did return to the next night in that win over the Bulls. So this team can play with anyone when they're healthy. That's the thing, though. Like every year with the Clippers roster they have here, the key word is healthy. This team has danger written all over them in a 7-game series. They could compete with anyone they're matched up with, and that ringless cloud hanging over a lot of these players is a real motivation. Russell Westbrook's hand injury is still a bummer having him out, giving Bones Highland some rare opportunities to show his worth. And maybe this increased playing time for him could show dividends down the road. But we'll go to the capital of California, the Sacramento Kings. They went 2-1 this past week. They have the 6th best record in the West. Kings dropped the game at home to the Rockets for bouncing back and winning the back-to-back home games against the Bucks and Lakers. The Rockets would go on a huge run to start the third, and the Kings could never fully recover in that game. But the wins over the Bucks and Lakers were huge team efforts with everyone chipping in. Sabonis had another triple-double in that win over the Lakers, as his head-to-head record with Anthony Davis is now 10-0. Pretty good personal record there. The Kings are sitting just above the play-in spots in the West, but it's so tight that could easily change by next episode quite a bit. So the pressure on the Kings to keep up that great play is there. They're built for it, though. Sabonis and Fox leading the way. That's a good 1-2 punch. Harrison Barnes is the old vet on the team, quietly doing his job effectively. Plus a shout-out to Malik Monk, advocating for that 6th Man of the Year award. And Keegan Murray's having a fantastic sophomore season as well. So the Kings are doing their thing. Just behind those Kings in that division and in the conference, the Phoenix Suns. They went 1-2 this past week, losing to the Celtics at home. The Suns would then bounce back and beat the Cavs before going into Boston and losing to the Celtics. After that game, head coach Frank Vogel said the Suns aren't at the level of the Celtics yet. Keyword being yet, as he still believes the Suns can get there. And this big three, they're trying to get some consistent time here. The Booker came back to the lineup from the injury in that win over the Cavs. And that combination with KD Beal is showing what their potential can be. The trio scored 20 points or more in each of the last 2 games. And I think this is a sign of things to come. They're starting to figure it out when they can actually play together. The Suns, they're sitting 7th in the West, and just in that play-in spot. They're trying to at least swap spots with the Kings to get them, out of that play-in situation. But we'll go back to LA. We'll go to the Los Angeles Lakers, who went 2-1 this week, beating the Bucks in a thriller where Dinwiddie rejected Dame's shot. Then the Lakers would host the Timberwolves and beat them soundly. Anthony Davis, man, what a night he had against Gobert was not playing, but he still had a big night. 27 points, 25 boards, 5 assists, 7 steals, 3 blocks. Those are crazy numbers. The Lakers would then follow that up, like I said, losing to the Kings, bringing Anthony Davis's personal record against Sabonis to 0-10. Lakers are still sitting 3 games out of that 6th seed behind the Kings, which get them into the play-in spots, but this could be tough ground to make up in the tough West. LeBron James still doing amazing things at his age, and big-time dunks in that loss to the Kings, but some key pieces of this team, they need to step up to really do some damage in the playoffs if they can get there. Like Anthony Davis and D'Angelo Russell, both these guys have been balling. And if they can get into the playoffs, they're going to be a dark horse. You can't tell me those young teams I mentioned, Oklahoma City Thunder, Minnesota Timberwolves, won't have something in the back of their mind there when they're facing LeBron James in a tough playoff situation. We'll see. That's still yet to come. But we'll wrap up the Pacific by going to the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors have the 10th best record in the West. They sit in that last play-in spot. They went 1-2 this past week, playing without Steph Curry. He's dealing with an ankle injury and hoping to return to the lineup this weekend. Without him, the Warriors lost to my Spurs, who didn't have Wembanyama in their lineup, and then they faced off again, and this time Wemby suited up, and go figure, the Warriors won this time. Huge highlight in that game was when rookie Jackson Davis threw down a facial on the number one overall pick, and the crowd buzzing. Warriors would then go to Dallas and lose to the Mavericks, and this team is obviously very different without Steph Curry in the mix, and they struggled offensively. Jonathan Kuminga was the lone bright spot, showing he's the real deal and should be given more touches going forward by Steve Kerr. I don't really see anyone behind the Warriors catching him for that spot, but they do have all hands on deck to try to get out of the play-in stages when the time comes. It's good to see Chris Paul back on the floor too, and he's really been a nice fill with Steph Curry's absence. But let's see what this team can do when everyone's back, and maybe Kerr needs to give some more time to Jackson Davis. And that huge dunk on Wemby might have punched his ticket in the more time in the lineup. Go to the last division, and last team to be mentioned in our recaps here, the Southwest Division, the division leading New Orleans Pelicans. They have the fifth best record in the West. Slow week for them, just going 1-1, beating the Hawks in that all-bird matchup before losing at home to the Cavs. I'm waiting for this Pelicans team to just start soaring up the standings, but they're just not getting it there. Looked like they were getting their shit together, and then they laid the egg out against the Cavs. CJ McCollum only had 9 points in that loss. You can't do damage in the playoffs having games like that. Pelicans have a date with the Clippers tonight, which should be a fun game. Then they have some winnable games against the Blazers and Nets before going to Florida to take on the Magic. Said it before, but when this team is clicking, that they're a fine-tuned machine with devastating players everywhere. They're so long. Herb Jones may look like he's got sleepy eyes, but he's one of the best defenders in the NBA. Don't sleep on him. Next up in the division, the Dallas Mavericks. They went 3-1 this past week with the 8th best record in the Western Conference. They easily took care of the Pistons and Bulls. Then they returned home and beat up on the Warriors. But Luka Doncic would leave the game with a hamstring injury. Hopefully nothing serious. The Mavs then went to Oklahoma City, and without Luka, they were in a tough one with the Thunder, but came up short. Kyrie Irving dropping 36 points and 12 dimes in that loss, and the Mavericks have been playing some pretty consistent ball of late. It's just, I hope this injury is not much for Luka, because that'll impact their chances big time. They're already 2 games back of the Pelicans in the division, and they don't want to drop any further down the standings. Hopefully he can come back soon, but in the meantime, Kyrie Irving's going to be leading the way. It's not a bad leader to have, and Tim Hardaway is going to take an even bigger role off the bench. I feel like this team is better suited to deal with a temp injury to Luka, much better than years past. The Mavs have a big showdown with the Nuggets at home on Sunday, and a little bit of a spaced out schedule with games against the Spurs and the Jazz in there, so maybe it's a good time to give Luka some time off to really come back healthy from this injury. We'll stick in Texas, go to Houston. The Rockets went 4-0 this past week as they're trying to keep their slim playoffs hopes alive. Sitting in the 11th position, I guess they're only 3.5 games behind the Warriors for that last play-in spot. If they can keep up this winning ways, who knows what will happen. They went on the road and beat the Blazers, Kings, and Spurs. They then returned home and beat the Wizards by 16. These Rockets, like I said, they're starting to click lately, and it's kind of surprising after their young stud, Alperen Sengun, looked to pick up a serious injury and had to get wheeled off the court. Luckily, this is good or the bad, but luckily the news show it's just a grade 3 sprain along with a bone bruise to his knee. But when you see a guy get wheeled off, you expect the worst. So he'll probably be done the rest of this season, but at least by next season, he should be good to go. So this has opened up some time for a very minute-hungry filled team here of youngsters trying to get some more opportunities. And with Sengun out, the Rockets have gone with a smaller lineup with Ime Udoka putting Jalen Green in more spots. He's looking like he was worthy of that number 2 overall pick he was drafted at. Fred VanVleet, he's looking like the steady Freddy, the vet they meant to bring in. And Amen Thompson, that rookie, man, he's getting time. And he had a 20-point, 10-rebound outing in the win against the Wizards. We'll see if this team has enough to chase down the Warriors and make the play-in. Next up in the division, the Memphis Grizzlies. They went 1-3 this past week. Grizzlies fell to the Hawks and Thunder, but bounced back with a home win over the Wizards. They then lose at home to the Hornets in a tough game where they went down early and really couldn't recover. A Memphis Grizzlies game is looking more and more like just open tryouts. There's some standouts really showing out, though, like youngster Gigi Jackson and G League alum Jake Revia. Trey Jemison has also stepped up when asked to, when Jaren Jackson Jr. has been out, and he's looked good in his time. The Grizzlies are just a young team figuring out their way in the NBA right now, you know? Any given night could surprise you and they could steal a win just because they're always going to work hard for Taylor Jenkins. But more often than not, this team's going to be an underdog with players just trying to develop and try to figure out who's going to be on the team next year. But we'll wrap up the team recaps by going to the San Antonio to talk about my Spurs. They went 1-2 this past week. Like I said, without Wembanyama, the Spurs beat the Warriors. But then with Wemby back in the lineup, they lost to the Warriors without Steph Curry. I mentioned Wemby got posterized a bit there by Jackson Davis, but Wemby had the perfect response saying, hey, getting dunked on is nothing. It's part of the game. I dunk on a lot of people, and a lot of people dunk on me too, but I think I block more often than I get dunked on. So that's positive. Man, that's a good answer. That's a shot blocker's answer. That's from the Alonzo Mourning book of shot blocking. Love it. Love where this team will be going in the future. The Spurs would then lose a close one at home to the Rockets, but the Spurs continue to take their lumps in the basement of the Western Conference, but they're developing. The team's growing. These lumps will show up as wins down the road, so I'm taking the good moments in with the bad. Lots of optimism from this Spurs fan, and that's the team recaps. Another one in the book, 20th time actually, and that's what we do. But let's go to from the team stuff to the individual stuff, starting with our points per game leaders. Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic, continuing to lead the league with 34.3 points per game. Just behind him, but still over the 30 point per game mark, OKC, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Milwaukee's Giannis Antetokounmpo. And just under the 30-point mark, Phoenix's Kevin Durant, Cleveland's Donovan Mitchell. Literally nothing changing on the rebounding side. Exact same top five as last week. Domantas Sabonis leading the league at 13.6. Behind him is Timberwolves' Rudy Gobert, Lakers' Anthony Davis, Nuggets' Jokic, Detroit's Jalen Duren. A similar grouping in the assist category. Tyrese Halliburton leading the league at 11.4. Behind him is injured Trae Young at 10.8. Might have to start taking him off the list considering he'll be out for a bit. Just behind them is Luka Doncic, Jokic, and Sabonis. On the defensive end, OKC's SGA leading the league still with 2.1 per game. Nipping at his heels, though, De'Aaron Fox with 1.9 per game, and just behind him at 1.8 is Matisse Thybulle of Portland and Cleveland's Donovan Mitchell. Kawhi Leonard of the Clippers rounding out the top five there. The blocks, we go to the Spurs and their number one overall pick, Victor Wembanyama. He's still leading the league in blocks with 3.4 per game. Still behind him is Utah's Walker Kessler, 2.6, tied with Brook Lopez of Milwaukee. Oklahoma City's rookie, Chet Holmgren, and Anthony Davis round out the top five. From recaps to stats to the Ren City top five, not much changing there either. A little bit of continuity going on. Number one, the Celtics. Number two, the Nuggets. Three, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Four, the Minnesota Timberwolves. And five, the Milwaukee Bucks. Pretty much the same list as last week. Celtics continuing to kick ass and take games even without KP in the lineup. Their coach closing out on shots better than some other teams in the league. Next three teams, I did a St. Patty's Day shuffle with the Nuggets moving from 2 to 3, Thunder moving from 4 to 3, and the Wolves dropping from 2 to 4. Sorry, I had the Nuggets moving from 3 to 2. That math makes up. But these teams are a little crapshoot. Could be rearranged on a daily basis. The way it's rocking this week, we had the defending champs slivering up. The Wolves had a little let down, so they dropped a bit, and the Bucks stay at number 5 with their up and down week. Lots of teams with chances, but I still think the Celtics are in that number one spot for real. Individual trophy talk, MVP, I'm still thinking OKC, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, but it's the tightest of tight races with Nikola Jokic of Denver. With those two teams exchanging the number one spot in the West, it could really go neck and neck down the end. Just behind that group, I have Milwaukee's Giannis Antetokounmpo, Dallas's Luka Doncic, and maybe Anthony Edwards in that group. So, Rookie of the Year, I think Victor Wembanyama's got a firm grip on that trophy. He's overtaken Oklahoma City's Chet Holmgren in my book. Sixth Man of the Year, same as last week as well. I'm thinking Malik Monk of Sacramento. Cleveland has led lots of injuries, and Karis LeVert has been in and out of the starting lineup. Hardaway Jr. is starting to find his groove again for the Mavs, but I still think that's Malik Monk's most improved player of the year. This might have had some injury issues here. We had that bad fall by Kobe White where Pascal Siakam blocked him and landed on him where it really looked bad. And you have Jalen Johnson who's been dealing with injuries, but I still think it's a two-horse race between those two with Kobe White getting the nod. Defensive Player of the Year, I'm still thinking it's Rudy Gobert, despite his money finger gestures. His defense still on point, anchoring the best defense in the league. Clean it up with rebounds. His fellow countryman, rookie Victor Wembanyama said, I know that Rudy has a very good chance of winning this year, and it would be deserved, and let him win it now, because after that, it's no longer his turn. Again, loving the confidence of him. Coach of the Year, I think it's a race that is tightening up as well. Going to be a toss-up between the coaches of inexperienced teams in the West. Chris Finch of the Timberwolves and Mark Daigneault of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Or the trophy could go out east to Cleveland's J.B. Bickerstaff. What he's done with that Cleveland team, despite everything they've faced this season, is truly remarkable. But hey, that's it. 20th NBA Weekly Recap by yours truly, Rent City. Another one bites the dust. Thanks again for tuning in. Some eyes will be averted from the NBA a bit here as we all dive into college hoops and the NCAA tournament with March Madness. But don't forget about the NBA. Your stars of tournaments past. Some good games coming up as we get our ducks in line for the postseason. So thanks again for tuning in. Rent City out.